Okay, good morning, or good afternoon, actually. And the presentation today, like Gary said, is on roses. And I think probably most of you, the reason you're tuning into a rose class in the first of fall is probably to see how to winterize. That might be the first thing on your minds. So we're going to start this presentation backwards. We're going to go all the way down here to the winterizing, and we're going to start there, and then we'll back up to what you might want to do next spring. Okay, how's that sound? Okay, let me get my particular slides out too. Okay, the first thing that you want to do in the winter is probably look over your plants, defoliate everything, that all the leaves that's on it. If you have any black spot or if you have any mildew, you want to make sure that you pick all of those leaves off and dispose of them. Do not put them in your compost. It'll just create another problem for you in the spring. Also, I think most of us know you never compost your rose stalks. Because of the thorns, they're wood, and they don't compost as quickly or as easily as some of our softer vegetation. So when you're reaching in there this spring and you're kind of turning it over in your hands and you're thinking, oh, this is just wonderful stuff, and you get pricked by a thorn, you stand a good chance of having a good infection from that. So remember, don't try to compost your rose hearts, your stems. And your leaves are diseased. If you're picking those leaves off, if they've got black spots or mildew, you don't want to put that in your compost either. Okay, the first thing that you want to do after you examine them and look at them is remove any of you want to start trimming a little bit in the fall. Now, there's two schools of thought on trimming and pruning your roses in the fall. The first one is you want to make them beautiful. Now, if you look at that beautiful rose garden over in Longview, they cut those all the way down 6 to 8, 10 inches from the ground. And they want them to look beautiful during the fall, or they want them to look clean. They're not really beautiful when they're just stalks, but they're clean and they're neat and they're orderly. But you might want to do that if they're growing up the walkway of your house or something. But if they're in your backyard like mine is, and I'm just interested in the health and the blooming ability of my plant next spring, I don't prune mine completely until early February. And what I do though, I go through them and I will take out anything that is dead, anything that is diseased, anything that is kind of growing in a manner that would whip. You know, the whip would get caught in the wind and kind of whip back and forth. Anything that's kind of a weak growth, I would cut that out. I cut all the blooms off, and like I said, I defoliate, and you dispose of those extra parts. When you do prune or do cut any stalk, you cut so that the stem is slanted toward. I don't know if you can see my hand or not, but you cut it so it's slanted toward maybe if I put the slide up, that would help you. It's slanted toward the inside of the bush. That's the only way I can describe it. They say outward facing bud. Yeah, okay, because you want the bloom, when the bloom grows in the spring, it'll come out here. If you cut it this way, your bloom would come out towards the center of your plant. You don't want that. You want them to come out to the outside. So that's the reason that is done in that fashion. But also in the wintertime, regardless of how careful you are, they will have a little bit of dieback on each one of those stems. And it's okay. But in about February, in fact, I go when the forsythia blooms. When the forsythia blooms, I know winter is over and it's time to prune my roses. That's when I go and cut that dead back, and then I do a thorough pruning. And that's when you leave 3 to 5 of your healthiest canes, and you cut it back to about 10 inches or so, depending on the bush, depending on the growth of the bush and how you want it to look. But that's when you go back and you cut these stems back down. Okay, so that's winter pruning, and it's also carrying into your spring pruning. And that is very, very important in the growth, the health, the looks of your plant. The pruning is just about most essential thing that you can do for it. After you can prune, like I said, you can prune thoroughly in the wintertime, and that's fine. A lot of nurseries and a lot of landscapers do that. But I do not. I prefer to wait until early spring, like February. The other
So
thing
may I ask a question?
Is you want to avoid the freezing, the constant freezing and thawing. It's not so much the freezing, it's the action of the freezing and thawing that does more damage than the actual freezing of your plants. The roses can take up to 10 degrees, which means they're very acclimated to our climate. So that's not the problem. It's the thawing. It's the constant freezing and thawing that will get to them.
Hey, Phyllis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Somebody had a question, Phyllis.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Marge.
Hi, Marge.
And, hi. So you mentioned pruning early February, but then you said you do a thorough pruning in the spring, early spring.
I do. When I put my roses to bed, I will clean up all of the dead, the broken, the crossed limbs. I will clean them out, but I will not prune them down to the ground as you would in the spring. Prune them down to the ground is the wrong thing to say. I would not prune them down to the 10 to 12 inches that I would normally do in the spring.
Okay.
I would clean out the dead wood. I would clean out anything that crosses. I would clean out anything that is weak or might, whip the plant around with the wind. And sometimes you get those little whippy limbs on them. I would clean all that out, and then I would just mulch them and leave them. But in the spring, when the forsythia blooms, that's the sign that winter is over. You will not have it. Usually, I won't say anything is ever for certain, but you won't have any more freezes after that. And that's when you go out in your garden and you start pruning anything back that was tender or delicate, like your roses or, whatever. So that's when I do my heavy pruning.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. What you want to do, like I said, what you want to do is prune. And when you prune, I'm sorry, let's go back. We want to mulch. I'm getting a kind of a lost here on myself. We want to winter mulch, and you will winter mulch to keep not necessarily the freezing, but the freezing thawing action away from your plant. And there are several ways of doing it. You can take beauty bark, or you can just take the ground around the plant. Do not put the dirt or the mulch up on the stalk. Put it up to it. And it can go, I've heard of as high as 10 inches. I usually do mine about 5 to 6 inches. I guess if we live in Alaska, 10 inches might be appropriate, but around here we don't have that severe of a winter. And if we do have a severe cold front that hits us, and you only have 5 or 6 inches of mulch around the base of your roses, again, not up the stem, you'll rot that stem. It needs to breathe, but get it as, don't pack it down tight, but get it up to the stem. If something happens where we have a sudden freeze or something, take an old blanket, take newspapers, take a sheet, take whatever you can get your hands on and drape it over your plants. That'll keep them from that hard freeze that's going to hit them. You can use straw to mulch. You can use anything that can kind of breathe. Okay, so that's kind of the winterizing. Now, something else that I do in the winter that I would recommend is I take a fungicide, and a fungicide is usually a sulfur type of a mixture. And I spray my roses after I clean everything off of them. I'll spray them just to protect them against anything that might try to attack during the winter. And reasonably so. There's not too much that's going to go in there and get your roses during the winter time, but I do it just for a precaution, and it's just my own preference to do something like that. Now we're going to back up. This is how you take care of them in the winter, and this is what we need to do right now. Again, trim the dead, the broken, the crossing, the limp, the weak, the dying. Get rid of it. Get rid of all those leaves so they won't contaminate your dirt in spring. Mulch, cover if you have to, and leave them alone, basically. Okay, now we're going to go back up to the presentation as it was originally developed for a spring type of a class. So actually there are several kinds of roses, and what I usually tell people is go through the various kinds of roses, decide what it is that you like, and then plan your rose gardens. Don't just go out into a nursery and say, oh, that's a beautiful rose or that's a pretty rose. Go in there and actually look at the roses and how they grow and what grows in your area. And we all live in these little microclimates, so you have to know what your microclimate is. And pick your roses for, their stamina, their beauty, their color, whatever it is that you think that, is what you want in your rose garden. You plant it. You just don't go out and, like I said, buy the first rose at Sagawa's or Walmart or wherever that you can find it. Think about what you're going to plant before you plant it. You'll be much happier and you'll have a lot better success. The other thing is there's a lot of new hybrids out. There's one called the Oh So Easy, and it's a kind of a carpet rose. It doesn't get too high, but if you want a border rose, it's a single rose. I think they're quite attractive. Some people might not think that they're that attractive, but they're very resistant. They're very hardy. They're pest resistant. They're everything except deer resistant. Nothing is deer resistant, I don't think. But anyway, they're a beautiful little border rose if you want to border your garden.
What do you mean by carpet rose?
They don't get very tall.
Okay.
They stay very low. They stay very mounded. They stay kind of roundish throughout their growth period, and they're miniatures. They don't get like some of our climbers or our larger shrub roses. Excuse me. They stay quite compact and quite small, and they make a beautiful border.
Okay.
They call those carpet. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Excuse me. And then moving on, we have how do you get rid of that? Anyway, there's various kinds of roses that you...
I'm watching this Zoom from the county.
So just
Okay. There's... Oh, get soft.
you want that going?
Yeah. Okay. There's also these knockout roses. And they're a relatively new rose, and they're extremely hardy. They're pest and disease resistant. And I put a small sprig of one by my back door about 3 years ago, and it has completely covered an area of about 8 feet high and about 8 feet across. They grow proficiently. They're huge. They get big, but they're beautiful, and they're tight, beautiful little roses, and then they open up kind of flat. But it's still blooming. I'm just looking at that thing and thinking, will it stop blooming? So that you don't have to trim it. They say do not trim it. They say don't feed them. And I have not put any food on this rose since I've had it. And they thrive on neglect. So if you have a problem growing roses, you'll love this one. This is a good rose. Anyway, back to a little bit of our landscaping. As I say, plan your rose garden. Are you going to need walkways? Are you going to need fountains? What are you going to need? Think about it. Lay it out on a piece of grid paper and really think about it. Don't just go start sticking things into the ground, because you won't be happy with that. The other thing is, the best time to plant roses is in the spring. And if you decide to use the bare root rose, do not plant them in the winter, because in the winter they don't have time for that rose or those roots to actually form and to be able to take in nutrients. I mean, it takes a while for that rose to actually get its feet in the ground, you might say. If you want to plant in the wintertime, containers, but it's still kind of an iffy thing. But bare root in the spring and summer is great. And if you're going to plant a bare root, soak them for about 24 hours before you put them in the ground. That gives those roots that's been locked in that, I guess it's kind of like a peat moss and paper they wrap them in. But it just gives them a chance to inflate and to take in moisture and water and kind of get ready for the ground. So soak them first. Always soak them first. When you plant your roses, dig the hole deeper and wider. It should be at least half again as deep and wide as your root ball. Don't forget to put some fertilizer around the base of that. And when you're I should go back. Let's go back to this one real quick. Because when you're planting, what you want to do is, do I have a picture of mounding? You have to mound, or you should mound. Okay, here's, build a mound in the center of your hole. Just a little round mountain of dirt. And loosen up those leaves or those roots very, very well. And then spread them out over the mound, and then add your fertilizer, amend your soil, do whatever it is that you kind of want to do there, but put a little bit of food around them at that time. And then very gently, do not pack the soil around them. Very, very gently pack the soil. Don't do like I've seen some people do and do kind of like a little Scottish dance across the top of them. You're not doing them a favor. They like loose, soft soil. So don't pack that soil really tight. Just kind of pat it down around them. Make sure you get the air holes out of it, the little air cavities that might form. But don't pack your soil real tight. Okay, watering. Roses. Now, this is kind of a hard thing to do because we get a lot of rain in this country, and I'll tell you, do not water your roses from the top. You're going to say, wait a minute, this is Washington. They get watered from the top, and that is true. But don't add to the problem by going out and putting a sprinkler on your rose garden. Water them from the ground, especially if it's a hot, humid day. The sprinkler from sprinkling them and getting them wet during the afternoon or late at night or into the evening is what causes your mold, and you don't want that. So I know we can't do a lot of things about our nature or our environment, excuse me, but what you can do is you not exasperate the problem by watering them with a sprinkler. Water them from the ground. They don't like a lot of water, actually. They like to be planted in an area where they have very good drainage. They do not like to have their feet wet, but they need to be moist. And so there's another little thing that you have to kind of watch for. Make sure that they have plenty of water, but not too much. And that means their soil is damp, but never wet. Okay. Here's the foods that they like, and these are the things that you could possibly put around them as you're planting them, as well as feeding them about once a month throughout the summer, and that's your bone meal, your kelp, alfalfa meal. Now, that's not the meal that you buy from your horse food store. There's actually an alfalfa meal that is ground up and is purified and so forth for plants. Epsom salts is real good for them. Well-rotted manure, that's great, or your commercial with the number in the center the highest, okay? Okay, diseases. We talked a little bit about the diseases, but in the spring and the summer, especially in wet, humid weather that we have sometimes in our summer, that's when we get our black spot. And that's when we get the powdery mildew. And then we always have these little critters called aphids and so forth that we need to talk about too. So the fungus is spread by splashing water on the leaves. And it's only controlled by a fungicide. So I know, like I said, we have rain. We can't control that. So it's best to get a good rose fungicide, which again is a sulfur, usually a sulfur, and just spray them about once a month with a good fungicide. That'll just help them. They do have a tendency to get the black spot and to get powdery mildew, and this will help prevent that. Good hygiene is also a practice in keeping your roses healthy. You want to make sure that they're spaced at least 3 to 4 feet apart. You don't want to cram your roses into a garden where, you know, they're just one big mass, because they need that ventilation. They need air between them. Another thing that we need to watch out for, we think, okay, well, I can only plant my roses every 3 or 4 feet. That means that I can plant rhododendrons in the middle of them. No, you're doing the same thing. You're taking up their ability to get plenty of air movement around. So you need to make sure that you have air movement around your plants. Oh, okay. So powdery mildew. Now that again, excuse my voice. I don't know what's going on with it this morning. That's spread by wind and warm, dry days, followed by cool, humid nights. So pruning is important, ventilation is important, sanitation, watering practices, and again, the fungicide. Something else that helps on powdery mildew is baking soda. You know, we all want to make sure that our little insects and our birds and stuff are safe from any type of insecticides that might come about. The fungicides are usually pretty safe, but you want to watch those too. But baking soda and water sprayed on the plants. Now, it won't look pretty for a few days, but it'll certainly take care of that extra moisture that's on your leaves and help control any mildew. You can always kind of dust it off later, but it will help. Aphids, these nasty little critters, and they can come, a lot of us just think of them as kind of like a little greenish, yellowish, you know, they come in red and black, and sometimes you look at it and think, oh my goodness, what is that? Thank you so much. Excuse me. That's better. So, I mean, they're aphids. And if we get a good supply of ladybugs in our area, we can always, that's their main food. They love those aphids. But if we don't have a lot of ladybugs to get rid of them, a good spray. Now, I told you don't spray from up top. Now I'm going to tell you to hit them with a spray of water. But this would be unusual circumstances that you would take and just spray them really well with a good stream of water to knock those little guys off of there. And if you do it, if you have an infestation, this is the only time you would do something like that. If you had an infestation, do it about every 3 or 4 days, because that's about when they start laying their eggs. Some of these guys lay their eggs about every 7 days, some of them like between 4 and 5 days. So I would do it about every 4 or 5 days until they're gone, and then, you know, lay off of that practice. That's not something you want to continue with your roses indefinitely. The other little nasty guy is these spider mites. And they're a little red or black spider-like looking little critter. And they live usually underneath the leaf, under the leaf. And they suck the sap from the leaf, and the leaf will kind of turn dry and brittle and kind of maroonish and kind of grayish, and it will just fall off. Yeah, it's sanitation again and ventilation, and your best preventative measures. A strong spray of water will also work on them, but you have to do it a little bit more often if you've got these spider mites, because you have to disrupt their life cycle. And again, they breed about every 2 or 3 days. They're prolific little critters. And, you know, back a little bit to our pruning, but not really on pruning. When we cut our beautiful bouquets, you are pruning. So think about where you're going to cut that bouquet. And always, if you cut it between a 5-leaf leaflet, it will bloom again very quickly. If you cut it up here at a 2 or a 3-leaf, it'll have to develop these leaves again before it'll bloom, because they usually bloom from, or their blooming stalk comes from, their blooming stalk comes from the 5-leaf area here. So yeah, this is where the last one, you can see a little nick here, and that was a 5-leaf. So anyway, what you want to do is always, when you cut your bouquets, cut them down here at where there's 5-leaf intersection. Okay. Now, you might not want on a shrub rose, if you want those beautiful big hips, and the birds love those things, or maybe you just want them for your bouquets or your floral arrangements or something. Don't cut your flowers at all. Just let the flower kind of die off, let it go, it'll kind of fall off, and then you've got this beautiful hip. So anyway,